I'm Lena Carver, 35. I live in Austin. Small house, too many books, a breakfast nook that catches the morning light like it's trying to apologize for the rest of my life. For most of my adult life, I've been the quiet one who moved away on purpose. Steady job, quiet friends, a life that fit inside 2 suitcases, and a stubborn refusal to be the family's emotional trash can. That was the plan, anyway. My birthday that year was supposed to be the kind of low-key thing I like. Takeout, a half-burned candle, a playlist of songs that mean nothing and everything. My sister, Marin Carver, showed up wearing the same expensive half smile she's always worn, the one that says, "I know how the world works, and you're doing it wrong." She'd driven down from our hometown because she wanted the photo op and the performance of concern. She set a cheap boxed DNA kit on the table like it was a party favor, and before I could even pretend curiosity, said it out loud as if I should be grateful for the theater. Well, now you can stop being another man's mistake, right? That line landed like a thrown stone. It wasn't the joke that hurt so much as how casual it was, how cleanly she could reduce me to a punchline. I've spent my life half watching the people around me, cataloging the slights that were never called what they were. Neglect, favoritism, the way family photographs always had one less chair for me at the center. People called me resilient, like it was a compliment. What they meant was I had learned to be invisible and still keep breathing. I had been careful to keep distance, to build a life where my worth wasn't measured by who remembered me at dinner. Then Dad, Edward Carver, died. Not dramatically, not like in movies, just quietly, as if he'd been waiting for an excuse to stop answering the phone. His death yanked the leash of family obligation tight, and suddenly my quiet life in Austin looked like a story that needed an edit. Marin's little gift suddenly felt less like a weird birthday stunt and more like a tailored blade. When grief mixed with that old familiar ache of being overlooked, the stakes stopped being theoretical. This was about proof, legacy, and whether the family I'd left had any right to define me. The room went quiet the way a held breath does before someone sneezes. Awkward, impossible to maintain. Maureen set the little white envelope down like a ceremonial offering, and then, because she loved an audience, opened it with the tiny, precise motion she used to open Christmas presents when she wanted the best part first. "I couldn't resist," she said, smiling the way you do when you know you've got the winning card. I already ran it. There was a printout folded inside, clinical and absurdly final. Marin slid it across the table like she was passing a menu. My fingers trembled when I unfolded it. The paper smelled faintly of printer toner and coffee, like a tiny office attached to the end of our family's long, tired performance. It said what I somehow already knew in the bones. I did not genetically match the Carver line. Instead, there were markers, letters and percentages I barely understood, that mapped me to another family name printed on the bottom. Hartman. For a ridiculous second, I laughed, the brittle laugh of someone waiting for a punchline. Then my mother, Claire Carver, who'd been sitting by the window knitting at the edge of the whole thing like it was weather she couldn't control, stopped knitting. Her hands went still. Her face folded the way paper does when you crease it too many times. "It's true," she said, and her voice was smaller than the sentence. "He's not Edwards." Marin didn't look away. She had that look people get when they watch a scene they scripted play out exactly as planned. "Well," she said, flat as a coin, "now you know." There it was. The same line she'd used earlier, dressed up in even colder clothing. Not a question. Not an apology. An announcement that she had been the keeper of this thing for 2 decades and finally decided to drop it into my lap because, apparently, birthdays are for detonations. My chest wanted to collapse and run in different directions at once. There was a kind of double grief. For the father I thought I had, and for the years I'd been measured by a family that had been, in one literal sense, measuring everything else but me. The way Marin's eyes glinted when she said she'd known for 20 years made the betrayal feel surgical. This wasn't a messy secret kept out of shame. It was a tidy ledger item in her mind, a truth she could produce when needed, like a receipt. Claire's confession wasn't cinematic. It was a small, terrible admission delivered like someone handing you a glass of water when what you really needed was a blowtorch. She said names in a voice that looked like it hurt to make them audible. She told the barest version of the story: a night, a mistake, a man named Henry Hartman. And then she folded away into silence. Marin folded the paper and set it back in the envelope like she was packing up a trophy. There was an immediate thrum of things shifting. The chairs felt different. The photographs on the wall felt like evidence in a case that had been quietly misfiled. I realized, with a cold clarity, that everything I'd been trying to keep at a polite distance — family, legacy, money, the little moral currency of being one of them — was now a problem that used my face as the headline. The joke had died the moment the truth landed, and in the corpse's echo, everyone's true shape showed through. I hired an attorney the way you hire someone to walk a mountain with you, because you can't do the heavy lifting alone, and you need someone who won't faint halfway up. Ava Brooks was the opposite of faint: brisk, practical, and allergic to melodrama. She listened once, closed her notebook, and said, "Someone's been trying to erase you from the books. That's what this smells like." She called it a pattern: small, surgical financial moves, a smear campaign of gossip, and now an incendiary DNA reveal timed to destabilize me. She didn't call it family. She called it strategy. Ava hired a private investigator named Gus Romero. Gus was the kind of man who keeps receipts for other people's disasters. He arrived 2 days later with a box of paper and a tired expression that said he'd seen worse, which is the nicest way an investigator can compliment a mess. He handed me a thick folder and said, "Start at the top." I did. There's a peculiar intimacy to seeing your life reduced to ledger lines and time-stamped transactions. There were bank statements showing withdrawals from Dad's account that didn't match any household expenses, cash transfers to accounts linked to Marin's card, a series of ATM withdrawals in towns she'd told no one about. There were realtor documents showing attempted control of property, and digital records, emails deleted and then recovered, where Marin queried about managing Dad's finances after his memory started slipping. The most humiliating piece, the one that felt like someone had stripped the curtains off my childhood home, was a receipt for a DNA kit, purchased at a pharmacy 2 towns over, the timestamp matching the date Marin said she decided to run it for fun. Gus had more than receipts. He had notes from the investigator Dad had hired the year he thought things might get ugly, photographs of Marin at the house late at night, copies of unauthorized withdrawals flagged by Dad's bank, even a short, clipped audio of Marin on speakerphone insisting to someone that this will fix everything. Dad had not only suspected, he'd prepared. He kept a paper trail like a man who spent his life believing record-keeping when relationships failed. The will reading felt like walking into a courtroom without the theatrics, a lawyer's office, too small for the number of people it had to accommodate. Ava sat next to me like a calm animal. Marin sat across with a face like someone waiting for applause. The executor opened the will, read the paragraphs, and then read the paragraph everyone had come for. Edward Carver had written things that were almost gentle in their bluntness. He'd known, he said, for as long as Lena could remember, and he'd chosen anyway to raise me as his daughter. He wrote that he left 70% of his estate to me because I had proven, in his view, who I was by action and character, by the life I'd made, not by blood tests. There was an addendum. Dad had anticipated war. He'd hired that private investigator and asked for documentation of any attempts to manipulate him or his estate. The addendum laid out instructions. Any attempt to contest the will would trigger a penalty. Named documents were to be released to an attorney if disputes arose. Receipts and findings from his hired investigator were to be submitted in the event of challenge. It was meticulous, almost grudgingly proud, the blueprint of a man who loved paperwork more than noise. Sitting there, holding the paper that said someone I loved had chosen me on purpose, I felt a cold, curious victory. It wasn't the kind that plays on a movie screen. It was a messy, legal, deeply human little victory, proof that my existence had been seen and accounted for. The folder Gus had given me was ammunition, but it was also a reminder of what my father had known and why he decided to fight in the quietest way he could. I left the office with the will folded in my bag, Ava's hand a steady weight on my shoulder, and a new problem that didn't look like family anymore. It looked like evidence. The contest rolled out like a slow-moving machine. Legal papers, formalities, people trading polite contempt in court-adjacent hallways. Marin tried every angle: coercion, claims of undue influence, theatrical indignation about family honor. Ava sat beside me with the same steady face she'd worn through the whole mess, and Gus's folder sat open on the table like a silent witness. When the judge read the will's no contest clause out loud, the room practically inhaled. The clause said challenge it, and you forfeit everything. Dad had not left the door open. He'd bricked it shut and left instructions on how to light the match. Marin's lawyer made a last-ditch attempt to argue the will was invalid, to cast doubt on Dad's capacity, to recast the receipts as coincidental bureaucracy. Gus's photographs and the investigator's notes landed on the judge's desk like evidence in a slow clap. There was the ATM trail, the recorded calls, the receipt for the DNA kit with Marin's card used at a pharmacy she swore she'd never visited. The addendum Edward had left, the one asking explicitly that any manipulation be documented, read like a map for this exact moment. When the judge ruled, it was clean and small. The will stood, the no contest clause was enforced, and any inheritance Marin would have hoped to claim evaporated. The court ordered restitution for the funds she'd taken from Dad's accounts. They were to be returned to the estate, and once the estate settled, to me. There was no gavel smash movie moment, just a clerk's stamp and an air of irreversible finality. Marin's face went white in a dozen new ways. For a beat, she looked like someone realizing they'd bet on a ghost and lost. Justice in court felt bureaucratic and oddly satisfying. It was a small miracle, the sort of thing paper does when it finally matches the truth. Marin was left to explain to a bank why choices she'd made had consequences. She emailed once, and then not at all. People in my hometown started to treat me like a person who had always existed, rather than a character in someone else's script. That's not fame. It's the quiet reallocation of respect. Claire, my mother, sat with me one afternoon after everything had settled and gave me the rest of the truth in small, terrible fragments. Henry Hartman's name came out like a confession and a relief at once. He was a man who drifted in and out of her life, one reckless night that became an anchor for decades of avoidance. She told me she'd been young, terrified of being judged, and convinced that the easiest path for Lena was to let Edward take the title of father. Edward, in turn, had chosen to be the better story. He'd decided, as Claire put it, to show up. That was the part she hadn't wanted to say out loud, that she'd made choices to protect what she thought I needed, and in doing so had wrapped me in a different kind of absence. Her apology was not a melodramatic collapse. It was the small human kind, fumbling, earnest, not asking for absolution. She wanted to know if I was angry. I told her I was. I told her I was tired. I told her I missed a father who'd been both gift and riddle. She listened like someone finally learning what honesty demands. After the documents were filed and the last of the small legal triumphs had been cataloged, I did something that felt like punctuation. I took 3 pictures from the wall. One of Dad smiling at a barbecue, one of the house at Christmas, and a stiff black and white of my parents the year they married. And I put them in a box, not burned, not thrown away. Boxed. I wrote a single sentence on the top of the lid, for context. Then I drove north. Oregon is not a dramatic escape. It's the kind of place that trades fireworks for weather and forces you to learn the patient work of seasons. I bought a small, weathered house with a porch that leans politely toward the ocean. There's a maple in the yard that drops its leaves like a slow apology every fall. I planted a small orchard of apple trees because the idea of things growing felt like a quiet, defiant statement. I will keep living. I used some of what Dad left to set up a modest scholarship at the community college for kids who felt like they were always on the outside looking in, the scholarship named, without fanfare, for Edward. For those who show up. People asked if I was going to gloat to rub the receipts in Marin's face. My revenge had been a courtroom, not a spectacle, and it didn't feed me the way I thought it might. The neat, legal win shuffled the pieces, but didn't fix the ache of being younger, overlooked, or the years of small absences. What it did give me was permission to define my life on my own terms, and to spend my days doing things that felt honest. Morning coffee in a real mug, a volunteer shift at the library, a slow, insistently ordinary life. Once, on a fog-heavy morning, a neighbor knocked and asked if I wanted to split a bag of apples. I said yes. We made pies later that day and sat on the porch eating warm, sticky slices while the sea blurred the horizon. Marin texted maybe twice that year, a truncated, "Hope you're well," and then silence. I didn't respond. Some bridges are better left as memories. The last page of the ledger Dad had kept, a tiny, meticulous list of things he valued, sits on my kitchen counter. Sometimes I reread it the way people reread old letters, looking for instruction or secret maps. Mostly I just like that he wrote it. It's proof that even imperfect people can make intentional choices. So that's the end of the story I tell myself now. Not the revenge you see in movies, not a circus of vengeance, but a slow rebalancing. The legal victory was a tool. The real work was quieter, deciding who I wanted to be after the truth landed, planting a tree that will, in time, keep producing fruit no one can argue about.